Is Tower Fantasy gonna dethrone Genshin Impact? No. Hell no, man. So that clip you just saw there was me comparing Tower Fantasy and Genshin Impact. And since it got a lot of views, I'm like, fuck it. Why not make a longer video to go in depth on the topic? So the question that's on everyone's mind, is Tower Fantasy a Genshin Impact clone? I think they're both good games. But over the past couple of days, there's been many clips popping up on my feed, especially videos like these. So as you can see with this video over here, it's comparing the differences between Tower Fantasy and Genshin Impact. The two games look pretty similar, especially with like the combat moves and stuff. But I say this with a grain of salt, and it's more so to praise Genshin rather to shit on Tower Fantasy. Genshin was basically a pioneer of its genre, and I think that a lot of games nowadays take inspiration from Genshin. So I don't think we can like fault Tower Fantasy for trying to recreate Genshin style, because I don't think it's that, because Tower Fantasy has its own unique gameplay. It's much more different than Genshin, and I'm pretty sure that these videos are only capturing the minor details that make it look like its clone, because there's so many things in these videos that don't capture the essence of Tower Fantasy. For example, there's so many more things to do in Tower Fantasy. Like, even though you see in these videos that these two games look pretty similar, just bear in mind that the creators of this video are actively looking for clips that match the similarity of Genshin Impact. And when you go out of your way to actively look for clips, then you're definitely gonna find some similarities. Like, for example, it's common knowledge that Genshin took a lot of inspiration from Breath of the Wild. But would I say that Genshin is a Breath of the Wild clone? No way. Genshin is an entirely different game, and the main pros of Genshin are based around the story and its characters, whereas with Breath of the Wild, the main appeal of Breath of the Wild is the world exploration elements. Now, are both games anime-styled RPGs? Yes. Are they kind of similar within their art style? I would argue no, but many people would argue yes. The main difference between Tower Fantasy and Genshin Impact is that Tower Fantasy is an MMORPG, whereas Genshin is a single-player RPG. This is a huge difference because an MMORPG and an RPG are totally different games, and the way you approach each game is very different. In Genshin, there's not really that many things you can do with your friends, whereas with Tower Fantasy, it's encouraged to play with your friends because, as it states in the title, it is an MMORPG. It's a massive multiplayer online role-playing game, which encourages raiding with other people. Now, as I said before, you can't really like put a patent or like copyright the wish system, because that's a model that almost every gacha game uses. Genshin uses Primal Gems, Tower Fantasy uses gold nucleuses to pull for characters. I'm gonna be saying this a lot through this video, but I just want to make one thing clear. Competition is good for players. Over the past 2 years, Genshin is basically the only big anime RPG game that's come out so far, and because of this, Hoyoverse didn't really have to worry about like stepping up their game. Not saying that they haven't done a great job, because Hoyoverse have been absolutely killing it with their character designs and their storytelling. That's one thing I praise Genshin for a lot. I get invested in all the characters, I get invested in all the stories. Genshin is by far the game that has pulled me in the most. That being said, do I think that Tower Fantasy will be able to beat Genshin at its own game of character design and world building? No way, because Tower Fantasy's main appeal is probably not through its storytelling and characters, rather the gameplay. In Genshin, after you completed all the story quests, went through all the ruins and dungeons, there's not really much to do in Genshin Impact. You log on to your dailies, that takes like 5 minutes. You spend your resin, that takes like, I don't know, another 5-10 minutes, and you're basically done for the day. Whereas with Tower Fantasy, there's a plethora of things to do. You can do world bosses, you can do raids, you can do ruins, you can do PvPs. There's so many things you can do in Tower Fantasy, and I don't think you'll ever be able to run out of things to do in Tower Fantasy. Now, earlier I showed you guys that the combat system looked pretty similar in Genshin Impact and Tower Fantasy, but that could be farther from the case. Genshin Impact's combat system is relatively simple. The animations are smooth, and it doesn't really take that long to finish quests and kill enemies. Whereas with Tower Fantasy, raids will take a hell of a while. The combat system is also sharper, faster, it's less smoother, but it's more intuitive. The double jumping mechanics in Tower Fantasy is something I heavily adore, and having different gears like the jetpack, the rocket launcher, and like the hand, whatever you think call it, they all make Tower Fantasy unique. Also, one thing that Tower Fantasy has that Genshin doesn't is mounts. You can drive a car in Tower Fantasy, go vroom vroom, and just, you know, explore the world at a faster pace than Genshin Impact. As you can see in this video right now, the person is riding a hoverboard, and I find that really sick. Competition is good for players like us because it forces companies to step up their game. Now that Tower Fantasy has now launched, I think it puts more pressure on both games in general, because now they're competing for each other. They're competing for the player bases. Both companies will step up their game and give the players what they want. Another thing that Tower Fantasy has that Genshin Impact doesn't is the character customization. I did a video 2 days back trying to create anime/Genshin Impact characters in Tower Fantasy, and believe you me, the character creation in Tower Fantasy is actually so amazing, man. There's so many minute details that we can create for our characters, and no two characters would be alike. Like, I was able to create Eren Yeager from Attack on Titan in Tower Fantasy, and the characters looked eerily similar. Check out the video if you haven't seen already, but the character customization in Tower Fantasy is just top notch, man. Just talking about it makes me so happy because character customization and having my own unique traits in a game is something that's very important to me, and it just makes me feel special whenever I'm playing the game. Hey you, enjoying the video so far? Then why not sub to this channel? It means a lot to me and I appreciate every single one of you. Thanks. Moving on to the most important part of any gacha gamer, the money. So in Genshin Impact, it takes approximately $2,500 to $3,000 to C6 or max out a character. Whereas in Tower Fantasy, the game is more generous with their roles. It will take a maximum of $1,500. I say that like it's not a lot of money, but in reality, it's a shit ton of money to max out a character. That's approximately almost half the amount it takes to max out a character in Genshin Impact. And given that both games use the gacha system, I applaud Tower Fantasy making it so that whales don't have to, you know, sell your kidneys to max out a character, right? Something I also really like about Tower Fantasy is that even if you're out of energy and can't receive rewards from doing dungeons, they implemented a mode so that you can help your friends do dungeons and receive points where you can spend in shops to buy other things. So even if you're out of energy, there's still stuff to do because you can help your friends and gain rewards while doing it. There's no shortage of content in Tower Fantasy, but that may also be a bad thing because since there's so many things to do, as a new player, you might feel overwhelmed at first, but for more experienced players, it's like heaven for us because there's endless amounts of content and you'll never get bored of the game. As for burnout, I suggest everyone to play their games at their own pace. And if you don't like the game, you don't have to play it. No one's forcing you to play Tower Fantasy. No one's forcing you to play Genshin Impact if you like Tower Fantasy. And if you like one game over the other, that's great. There's no need to shit on another game because two games can coexist at the same time while both being good games. That's the major point that I have when I'm making this video. It's that both games are really good and that you shouldn't play another game just because you like its counterpart. Now the big question I get asked a lot is, Hyacinth, what do you think of the characters in Genshin Impact versus Tower Fantasy? Now I basically started this channel because I really love playing Tower Fantasy, but if I'm being objectively unbiased over here, I don't think anyone can match Genshin's art style and its detailed character designs. There's just something about Genshin's art style that captivates me to play the game a lot, and if it weren't for the characters, I probably wouldn't be playing Genshin as much. However, that's not to say that Tower Fantasy's character designs are bad, because they are bangers too. Have you seen Tsubasa? Have you seen Crow? Have you seen King? Have you seen Coco Ritter? Man, I think Crow's character design is my favorite, and dude, I'm definitely rolling for Crow. He's my favorite character in Tower Fantasy by far. I mean, there's a lot of similarities as well. In Genshin, you have artifacts. In Tower Fantasy, you have matrices, and those are both used to upgrade the power level of your characters. However, in Tower Fantasy, there's more ways to upgrade your characters than Genshin Impact. If I were to make a quick summary of the differences between Genshin Impact and Tower Fantasy, just a quick 10-second summary, it would be that Genshin Impact is a more simplistic game, and if you're just a casual player playing the game for the first time, Genshin is definitely more appealing. However, as someone who will probably play these games for hours on end a day, I'd say that Tower Fantasy's gameplay is more appealing for those who will play for a long time. Because there's more things to do, right? There's more ways to upgrade your characters in Tower Fantasy. There's more ways to customize your characters in Tower Fantasy. There's more things to do. You can play with your friends. You can PvP. There's an endless amount of content to do in Tower Fantasy. So, Genshin is more simplistic. Tower Fantasy is more complex. Whichever style you like, pick the game that'll cater towards you. Comparing the story of Tower Fantasy to Genshin Impact, currently at this moment, I would say Genshin Impact's story is by far better than Tower Fantasy. Take this with a grain of salt because as someone who's played the closed beta, we haven't even seen 1% of Tower Fantasy's story. And the beginning quest of Tower Fantasy had me tearing up as well, so both of the games definitely have good stories. I'm only saying that Genshin's story is currently better because, come on now, Tower Fantasy's story hasn't even begun. I mean, it's an unfair comparison, but if we're being objective right now, Genshin's story is probably better, but that could change in the future when newer content and story releases for Tower Fantasy. Well, that's basically it. Thank you guys for the support so far. This channel has received exponential growth ever since I started posting Tower Fantasy content. I'll be streaming the global release of Tower Fantasy at twitch.tv/HyacinthLive with a 1. Subscribe to the channel. You guys are amazing. This has been Hyacinth. Peace.